Hello, and welcome to Inside Cancer Careers, a podcast from the National Cancer Institute. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler. I work at the NCI in the Center for Cancer Training. On Inside Cancer Careers, we explore all the different ways that people join the fight against disease and hear their stories. Today, we are talking to Dr. Karen Knudsen, CEO of the American Cancer Society, about how curiosity and strategy combine to make progress against disease. Listen to the end to hear Dr. Knudsen's recommendation and to have a chance to take your turn. It's an honor to welcome Dr. Karen Knudsen to the pod. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Bogler. It is just an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Knudsen is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Cancer Society and its advocacy affiliate, the ACS Cancer Action Network. She's the first woman to hold those positions. Before ACS, she was on faculty and held leadership positions at Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center at Jefferson Health, including serving as the Executive Vice President of Oncology Services, overseeing both care delivery and research. Her research was focused on precision medicine for advanced prostate cancer with a focus on relapse, a significant problem in that disease. And I should mention that Dr. Knudsen also serves on NCI's Board of Scientific Advisors. Dr. Knudsen, I'm always interested in how people find their way to science as a career. What got you started?
Yeah, so I actually don't come from a family that's full of physicians or scientists. It's just something that I wish I could understand even in myself. I think I was just naturally curious about science and followed that path. And it's steered me in the right direction, that curiosity, I think, my whole career.
Your primary interest was in biology. That's what you studied at George Washington University. You moved into molecular biology. That seems natural. People of our generation were drawn to that field. But then cancer. How did you get interested in cancer?
Yeah, it was a really interesting journey that I wish I could say was planned, but really wasn't. So in fact, as a child growing up, I had always thought I would go become a physician because I thought that if you enjoyed science, that's what you should do. I didn't know any scientists, so I didn't know how to go about becoming a scientist, nor did it honestly even enter my mind. I went to George Washington. They have a wonderful biology program where you have a very rich ability to get to know your professors very quickly, starting your sophomore year. So I started interning in a lab, and in that laboratory, they really recognized how much I love science and nominated me to work at the National Cancer Institute at Frederick for the summer. And so I interned with Dr. Garfinkel at NCI Frederick. And it was at the time that the HIV epidemic was really in its peak, and really lack of understanding about retroviruses was profound. And so the Garfinkel lab studied TY1 retrotransposition, and it was thought that this was a way for us to understand how HIV worked. And so I was very excited in retrospect to get involved in that because I could draw a clear line behind the science and helping someone, which I think was my driver. So after those experiences, and I was using yeast genetics as a model system, which was very exciting at the time, and still is for me.
Yeah.
But it is the case that, I decided to make a shift, and that what I really loved was science in the way that you could generate breakthroughs that could truly help more people than you could seeing individuals come through your clinic every day. So this led to this going to UCSD and getting my PhD with a focus in molecular biology. I loved yeast genetics. So yeast genetics was what actually brought me to cancer. At the time that I was there was the time that all of the cell cycle genes were being identified. And the way that happened in part was that mutational analyses or mutational strategies had been performed in fission yeast, Schizosaccharomyces pombe. And those mutant lines, which were sensitive to radiation, distributed across the world in different laboratories. And I was given one to work on, Schizosaccharomyces pombe RAD1, which was highly radiation sensitive. And so through complementation strategies, I cloned RAD1. It was now known to be what now we know is part of the 911 complex for DNA repair. And it got me really interested in cell cycle, really interested in checkpoints. And then, of course, you started to envision, well, what do you do with this information if your goal is to help someone? And so then that link to cancer, uncontrolled cell growth, and cell cycle started to really resonate with me. And still, right up until the moment that I stepped into my role as CEO of the American Cancer Society, have a very active funded lab where a core component of what we did was always cell cycle. And I'm very proud of my trainees and what they were able to discern. But that's how I came to cancer, was love of science, being in the right place at the right time, and being able to track it to something that I wanted to do. And that's help people.
Fascinating. I mean, it's interesting that you say, when you were younger, you were thinking of being a medical doctor, right? And then experiencing science gave you that other perspective. That's a lot of what we're trying to achieve with this podcast, is to help people see all the different ways that you can participate in the cancer community. So was prostate cancer a disease that you were particularly interested in? Was it just a good model, or how did that happen?
Yeah, great question. So in my doctoral work, it was certainly all about cell cycle, and I loved it. I loved the intricacy and the logic of cell cycle and cell cycle gone awry in cancer. But for my fellowship, I recognized within myself that I needed to make that next step, the next step toward more of a direct line for helping someone. In other words, translation. And so I thought about that as I thought about what mentor I would go work for. And so, I had the benefit of having all these wonderful labs around me in San Diego. And the interview that really resonated with me was with Dr. Webbs Cavney, who was also, I know, your mentor too. We had a little time to be in each other's lab. We talked like ships in the night. And boy, what a great decision I made. When I sat down in his office, I realized his mind was aligned with mine, which is the reason that we do this. The reason that we do cancer research is with aligned towards solving for a problem that is a real life human problem. And I loved that. And so when I decided to join Webbs Lab, that was probably one of the most pivotal decisions I made in my scientific career. And I thought I would be joining either his brain tumor group or his rhabdomyosarcoma group. Of course, I knew him from the cell cycle world as being the person who had identified tumor suppressors through studying retinoblastomas. And I was very interested in the RB1 gene. And much to my surprise, after I had already agreed to come, he sat me down in his office and said, "Here's the thing, Karen. All of this work is happening right now in the world on breast cancer." And it was at the time that women had really started to demand more clinical trials, more research being done in breast cancer. And he said, "And we're going to make gains over there, we, the oncology community." He said, "But the counterfoil to that is prostate. And, the population is aging. Prostate cancer is going to become even more frequently diagnosed, which was already the number one diagnosed cancer of men in the country, not, number one malignancy." And he said, "We've got to do something about it because we actually don't understand advanced disease." And I thought, oh God, what do I know about prostate cancer? But the more I started to look into it from the clinical point of view, from the point of view of what is the clinical problem that needs to get solved, it was a lack of understanding of how it is that hormone action drives uncontrolled cell growth in the prostate. And now this starts to resonate with me. Like, okay, everybody understands prostate cancer needs testosterone, but nobody knows how to make that link between what testosterone does and how cells get the go grow signal. Understanding that the androgen receptor is present in, many tissues, almost every tissue in the body. What's unique about the prostate that it gets a go grow signal from testosterone? I thought, oh, okay, I'm probably uniquely positioned to figure that out. And so then pulling together all these wonderful nuclear receptor people that were all around me at the time, I had to, understand androgen receptor and nuclear receptor signaling in order to link that to cell cycle. And so I was able, through partnerships and learning with the community around me, able to put together what I think was a pretty unique research program that led to new nodes of opportunity, new understanding of hormone action, but also new nodes of opportunity for treatment in prostate cancer. And then all these years later, co-writing clinical trials using CDK4/6 inhibitors in combination with hormone therapy. Bingo. I mean, it just felt like it kind of all came home when that started to happen. I was in the right place at the right time, but going to Dr. Cavney's lab was the most important choice I made to get to the path where I am right now.
And I think you highlight a very interesting and important point, which is being able to identify the right question at the right time in the right environment is so critical to finding work that can make impact.
And I think I'm very proud of my trainees, and it's the thing that we talked about a lot in the lab all the time. Every year we would set aside some time to say, all right, here's our body of work. Here's our body of work in the context of the whole environment around us. And there were no sacred cows. And, we'd say, like, what are we uniquely positioned to answer that we can do faster and more thoroughly than another lab? Like, why would we want to go into this particular area? And I think that kind of rigor in thinking actually allowed us to shape and change beyond just cell cycle and to add new types of thinking in the lab about the importance of understanding hormonal control of DNA repair. And then ultimately being able to contribute to PARP inhibitors as breakthrough approvals for prostate cancer because of that work was really meaningful. And it's because we had such a good tie to the clinic. So, we were constantly thinking about what are the clinical problems that are trying to solve? What are we good at modeling? What is better for somebody else to do? Because it's just not our sweet spot. And then what resources, meaning people and infrastructure, do I need if I'm going to attack this particular scientific problem?
Interesting perspective. Often the kind of research that you did, that I did, is called curiosity-driven research, but I'm hearing from you that it's curiosity plus strategy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that ultimately is how I led the lab. I think that now when I watch my previous trainees that are, now professors and in pharma, I think it's how their mind works too. And it was really not me saying, here's the strategy. What I loved about it, what I really, really loved about it was being able to sit with my team every year. We do a retreat, right? And sit and think with them about what is the right thing for us and hearing their view, their points of view. When you get to that go, no go part on a experiment or go, no go part on a project, it's nice to have the divergence of thought so that you can ultimately come as the head of the lab to make hopefully the right decision. Not that I always made the right ones.
Who does, right? So around 10 years or so ago, you started taking on some leadership roles in the Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center. You've already kind of told us how strategic your approach was to your science, so I can imagine that was a natural step. But what motivated you to take on those kinds of responsibilities?
Yeah. So when I left my fellowship, my first faculty appointment was in Cincinnati at the University of Cincinnati School of Medicine. And I was, again, right place, right time. All these brilliant minds had been hired in Cincinnati right out of their fellowship. Everybody was, very excited about having this groundswell of knowledge of cancer. But I also recognized that I needed to stay very current again with what was happening in the clinic. So I was very lucky to have a urologist, Bruce Bracken, and a radiation oncologist who kind of took me under their wing we started to work together in partnership, and we formed this, what we called the Prostate Cancer Working Group. And that way I could explain to them the kinds of things we were doing. They were telling me the problems that they had in the clinic, and we set about trying to solve those together. A missing component was medical oncology. And ultimately, that's why I started thinking about going elsewhere, because at the time it just was not a missing component. And when you study advanced disease, it's very hard not to have a robust GU oncology program right there. Now, I think they have one now, but at the time it was just kind of missing. So I was amenable to recruitment. And when Jefferson came calling in Philadelphia, they said, we want you to start the prostate. We want you to we have all the stuff. We have all the pieces. We have urology, rad onc, med onc. We have a risk clinic. And we have this massive diverse patient base, and we've got scientists, but we don't have anybody to anchor them all together. Okay, so now you're speaking my language. So they wanted me to come and start the prostate cancer program. So I did that, and I find a lot of personal satisfaction in building teams. I've learned that about myself through the years. And so I put that together for Jefferson. We started a program that became part of our official programs at the NCI through our NCI designated cancer center. But we also expanded it to the entirety of Philadelphia. So we started a prostate cancer working group that included every prostate cancer researcher or clinician who wanted to, that we could find from Temple, from Penn, from Wistar. And we met once a month, and we did work, which was great. And so I loved that. And so then when you start to be that person, people start to ask you to do other things that require team assembly. So probably not known by the external world very much, but I actually served as the first vice provost at Jefferson. So my whole goal there was I was charged by the provost to put together the clinical and the basic research teams. And at that time, I was also the deputy director of the cancer center. So ultimately, the institution made a change, asked me to take on the cancer center right on the precipice of this massive expansion that I actually didn't know was going to be planned, nor did I think anybody really know except our new CEO. So we were a 3-hospital system in Center City, Philly. We had great science. The prostate cancer group was ticking and humming. It was really phenomenal. And then we had this incredible opportunity to expand, because we went from 3 hospitals, wholly owned and operated, with a big prostate cancer base to ultimately, by the time I left, 16 hospitals, wholly owned and operated. Now it's 18 across 2 states. And so I had the opportunity to think about how we take all the awesome research that we do and put that into practice by putting clinical trials out into the community and setting up 4 different advanced care hubs with clinical trials so that we actually had an opportunity to get breakthroughs, to get the research that was happening at Jefferson and beyond out to people. And I loved that.
Phenomenal. I mean, it sounds like yet another opportunity to make more of an impact and an exciting time also to be there. You obtained an MBA. I don't know if that was coincident with this or what the timing there was, but what was the reason for that?
So at Jefferson Health, we were ultimately a 33,000 employee, $11 billion company. And I reported to the CEO. And he's a brilliant guy, Steve Klasko. He's absolutely brilliant. And, I learned a lot from my C-suite colleagues. But what I saw, one person's opinion, is that as we went and expanded and assumed these community hospital systems that did cancer care, but had not a lot of expertise in clinical trials, and sometimes they were employed, sometimes they were not employed, sometimes they were happy that Jefferson had come over, and sometimes they were deeply skeptical about what was going to happen. I realized that we were going through this rapid merger and acquisition and doing it, I'm going to call it in an academic medicine kind of way. And I thought to myself that there must be a better way, and I'm not going to learn it listening to the echo chamber in academic medicine. And so I'm going to go get my MBA. So I sat with my CEO and I said, this is what I'm going to do. And what he said to me, which I think was brilliant, is he said, look, go get your MBA. You go do that thing. He goes, but do not focus on healthcare. In fact, get away from the healthcare people. Because if you really want to break some things and make change, you've got to hear from people with external points of view. And it was great advice. So I learned about M&A from people who were bankers and in finance. And, it's an executive MBA program. So you're working with people who are already in a C-suite or just below the C-suite and want to be, but you learned a lot from each other. I learned so much that I didn't expect to learn about people strategy and managing, human capital, which you don't ever learn about in science. And so that was really valuable to me. But I also realized what an advantage you have as a scientist, because you don't realize it, but you are trained with a business mindset, right? Because when you're running a lab, you're running a business. You have to think about strategic priorities and finances and managing people. But you also have a real comfort with hypotheses and a real comfort with being wrong. And a real comfort with using data to guide your decisions, which it shocked me that some people in the business world they actually don't know how to statistically analyze data and they don't lean on it like I do. So if there's one thing I brought to the American Cancer Society is that we are a data-driven organization. If you want me to run in direction A, you better tell me why B's wrong and A is the right way to go. And I'm going to ask you for every piece of data to understand that. And so it's very freeing. I actually think that scientists are uniquely positioned to be business people, one person's opinion.
That's really interesting, that combination of thought processes. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk to Dr. Knudsen about her work at the American Cancer Society. The NCI recently launched a new online seminar series. Here to tell us more is Naz Zahir, the director of the Cancer Training Branch.
Yes, we launched the NCI Rising Scholars Cancer Research Seminar Series in January to highlight the research and contributions made by NCI-supported postdoctoral fellows and early career investigators at NCI laboratories and NCI-funded institutions nationwide. The talks are every month on the third Thursday, and you can see them and register for them on the NCI website. There will be a link in the show notes, or you can search for NCI Rising Scholars.
That sounds great. What kind of topics are their speakers covering?
We have a broad range of topics, pretty much any kind of cancer research. We have had basic science topics, clinical research, health disparities, cancer prevention, immunology, and many more. Each talk is related to a recent publication by the presenter, and there is plenty of time for Q&A.
What if you missed a talk?
We post a recording of the presentation a few days after the talk, along with a transcript and captions, so you can always catch the talks at your convenience.
Thanks, Naz. Check out NCI's Rising Scholar Seminar Series if you're interested in some great research that's increasing knowledge right now. All right, and we're back. Dr. Knudsen, your move to the American Cancer Society from academia to the nonprofit world represents another career pivot. Same question, what motivated you to take this leap?
Yeah, if you would ever ask me if I would do what I'm doing right now, sitting here in Center City, Philadelphia, I would say absolutely not. I loved my job. I was the EVP of Oncology Services. I found great satisfaction in taking the clinical teams and delivering the best possible cancer care in every corner that we covered, and also getting the science there, right? And ensuring that our science is addressing the needs of our catchment area and leaving nobody behind, and developing cancer screening strategies to bring out to the community instead of asking them to come to Jefferson. Again, using data-driven research solutions. So I loved all of that. And then I got this call to look at the CEO position at the American Cancer Society. And like you and like other cancer leaders, you get these calls kind of regularly, right? But I was very thankful to ACS because I was an ACS grant holder, right? When I needed research as a cancer center director, I had an IRG grant that gave me pilot funds to spawn what were really amazing new ideas from my faculty. So, okay, I was appreciative of that. I was also the president of AACI, the Association of American Cancer Institutes, which is largely an advocacy organization. And that's where the 106 cancer centers of the US hang together every year, link arms, and push for common sense policies to help cancer patients. And ACS had been our partner there too. So I really respected that part of it. But the thing that really got me about ACS was the fact that a lot of our cancer patients were in Center City and came to our safety net hospital in Jefferson. And so the difference in outcome between someone who can come to chemotherapy 5 days a week versus someone who can only come 3 days a week because they don't have transportation is huge. So this, what I call basic blocking and tackling of cancer care, housing, transportation, digital literacy, information about cancer, education of the caregiver, all of that stuff, which I now call patient support at ACS, was how we got our patients to care. And so I was very thankful to ACS because of all of these things, but especially patient support. So I got a call from ACS and they asked me to take on this job. And they told me something I didn't know, even though I'd known about ACS my whole career. What I didn't know is that this 100-plus-year-old organization was actually not at all 100 years plus. It was brand new. Because ACS had been a federated model. It had been multiple separate organizations with many CEOs and multiple strategies and multiple different areas of emphasis across the country, which explained a lot to me. It explained why I was touching and feeling something at ACS in Philadelphia that's very different than someone might touch in DC or in Los Angeles or in a rural community, because they were truly separate organizations. So what they explained to me is that they had gone through business transformation, which I consider to be a good word, and they put together these multiple into one ACS. And it was legal, it was financial as one unit, but it was not yet strategic. So now you're speaking my language, right? Because now I have an opportunity to take previous teams, meaning the federated models, and put them together in the name of cancer for the greater good. And so I had this series of meetings with the board because I had no reason to leave Jefferson. I loved what I did. And if I was going to do it, I was not going to be the keep the trains running CEO. I was going to say, we're going to have a greater impact than we have right now and define that with data and metrics and really act where we are uniquely positioned to act and not someone else. So I had a series of meetings with the board. I gave them tough talk. Here's what's wonderful. We got to do more of this. And here is some stuff that I don't know if belongs to ACS. And some of that was with research, and some of it was with advocacy, and some of it was with patient support. I had thoughts about how to structure this to make it more impactful across the country in everything that we do. And I didn't realize that that's what they were looking for, but I think they were looking for someone to come in and really be a change agent and for a positive. This has always been an amazing organization, always, but clearly ready for logarithmic growth in other ways. And so I feel very humbled and honored and absolutely delighted to lead this organization. We got so much more to do. And we do a huge amount of what we do in partnership, including the NCI, even for advocating for NCI funds. It's one of the things I can do as a CEO that can't do from within the NCI, but we can, and we know how important that is. So every day is a good day because I know we're doing good in the world, and I love that.
And we're deeply grateful for that advocacy. Obviously, it's critical. So, I mean, you broke quite a few barriers in taking on this role. But as I mentioned already, you were the first woman to be the CEO. You're also the first CEO to come from cancer science and to have been a leader of a cancer center. So the transformation, you've implemented pillars: advocacy, patient support, discovery, and development. How's that transformation going?
It's going really well, and I credit my executive team. So one of the things that I wanted to dismantle was the idea that ACS is a location, right? We work in 5,000 communities across the country. So I had no ambition to relocate everyone to Philadelphia or to Atlanta or to any main location. So I really hired best and brightest to lead these pillars. But before I talk about them, as I want to mention those guys for a minute, the foundation of everything that we do, right, rests on health equity and cancer care equity in particular. And so it was surprising to me that we had not yet put in a chief diversity officer. So one of my first moves was to put in place our chief diversity officer, Tawana Thomas Johnson, who is a rock star of my world. And when I talked about strategic choices, things that we are uniquely poised to act on that maybe, but setting aside things that we shouldn't act on. If it doesn't align to our commitment to health equity or to cancer care equity, that's a somebody else thing. Everything really has to stand true to that. So she's got a big role. She shapes everything we do, all pillars. And so our vision of what it is that success looks like is ending cancer as we know it for everyone. I always call this the 8 words that define us, but those 2 words are more powerful than the rest, right? Yes. So And because there are things that we can uniquely do in that space that are harder to do for a government program, but we can. And so putting that person in place, it was just, I think, I was very blessed to find her already within ACS. And so she knew it, she knows it. And, she does magical things like goes out and ensures that 1,500 health equity ambassadors are trained to go out and work in communities for prevention and screening that are movers and shakers in their communities. And it makes a difference. And then we measure ourselves by how well we do. So all of our organizational goals hang on things like impact, like lives touched through prevention and screening. Not just did we do a screening activity, but did we enhance screening as a result, right? So these are the kinds of things that we put into play as an executive team that are really what we can do as ACS. So then standing on that foundation of health equity are the pillars. So, research is, of course, incredibly important. Our research team in Atlanta continues to just, set the single book of truth for the nation on cancer incidence and mortality and trends. But then we also have the extramural program. So what are the kinds of things that ACS should be funding that is complementary but non-redundant with the NCI or other funding agencies? So we went on a listening tour of the cancer centers. I polled my peer group, my brothers and sister cancer center directors, asked them what they prioritize, and we've started to shape our research priorities accordingly. Now, in order to have somebody lead that, I needed just the right chief science officer. So this is where I have to apologize to you because I stole him from the NCI, and that's Bill Dayhut. Dr. Dayhut is amazing, another rock star in my world, and just absolutely revolutionizing our ability to have impact through discovery. He is terrific. I know you guys already know that. So he is wonderful. But as much as these breakthroughs happen, access to those breakthroughs we know is only happening for a percentage of people in this country. And that's where advocacy comes into play. So this is a 501c4. So that's, business jargon. What does that mean? It means that you can and do lobby. And a lot of the battles that are fought in the name of health equity happen at the state level. Perfect example is biomarkers. We've just gone state by state to ensure that all these wonderful oncology agents that require biomarkers to match a patient to therapy are covered in the state plans. Because guess what, team? They weren't. And so Illinois was the first one that, with our push, would pass this into law. And then other states followed: Arizona, Rhode Island, Louisiana. But all of those advocacy wins came because we have the data from research and the experience with our patients, right? The last pillar, patient support. So that's all of the places that cancer patients fall through the cracks. That's the transportation, the lodging, the patient navigation, patient education, prevention and screening programs. And so finding just the right person to lead that was challenging because this is a new construct, not new activities, but new in terms of thinking about who is going to be the strategic head of that, who thinks about from a data-driven way what patients need now and what they're going to need 5 years from now. So I had the bliss and honor of leading that at the beginning until we hired Dr. Arif Kamal out of Duke, medical oncologist who leads patient support. And I should also mention that advocacy required no new hire. I mean, Lisa Lacasse, who's the president of ACS CAN, is absolutely first rate. And to watch her masterfully acquire everything she needs to know from patient support and research in order to have advocacy push forward in ways that truly improve lives, like millions of lives with one signature. She's phenomenal.
I mean, I could talk to you for hours about your strategy, but we don't have the time today. But I do refer our listeners to the in-depth interviews you've given to the Cancer Letter and elsewhere, where you take a much deeper dive into this incredibly interesting strategy. I do want to take a slight pivot and ask you about career advice. Your career has obviously been phenomenally varied and interesting and has presented you with many different challenges. Our listeners, people who are listening and thinking, wow, that's very interesting. What advice would you give to people listening if they're interested in the kind of work that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very willing to talk to people if they have any questions about things that they think particularly that I did or didn't do. Always as important to understand. But the advice that I generally have given to my team, my lab, and my trainees and faculty was always be willing to take the call. You understand what drives you and where you really excel, but also where you want to continue to grow. And when someone calls you and says, I want you to think about a thing, don't just discount it. Take the call, because only two things will happen. One of two things will happen. One, you'll either feel great about what you do right now. Like, God, no, I want to stay in what I'm doing right now because I absolutely love it. And this is it. This is my buoyancy point. This is what I want to do. Or you'll think, I never thought of that before. And maybe you'll see yourself in that role. Maybe you won't. But it's the case that may get your mind thinking to how close to your ultimate goal is it. And so I think just taking the call and being willing to explore is a really important thing to do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all these insights. And we wish you, of course, continued good luck at the American Cancer Society, and I'm excited to see what you accomplish there. We're going to take a quick pivot and go to a segment that we call Your Turn, because it's a chance for our listeners to send in a recommendation that they would like to share. If you're listening, then you're invited to take your turn. Send us a tip for a book, a video, a podcast, or a talk that you found inspirational or amusing or interesting. You can send those to us at ncicc@nih.gov. Record a voice memo and send it along. We might just play it in an upcoming episode. But I would like to invite our guest, Dr. Knudsen, to take her turn.
Oh boy, this is really hard. I have all the things I could say off the top of my mind. Since we did talk about career and career advice, I also think a corollary to that is motivating people. And so one of the things that I really enjoy, and I used it with my faculty at Jefferson, I used it with my trainees, and I've used it here at ACS. It's a little bit dated in terms of the actual content, but the examples, but the messaging is absolutely on point. It's Simon Sinek on why, on teaching people why it is that you do what you do, and that people are attracted to the why you do what you do, not the what you do. And he has this incredible podcast or TED Talk that gives you some insight about why the Wright brothers, despite the fact that they had very little funding and no training, were successful in flight, versus someone who was actually very well resourced from the government and had all the right technical training in the background. Talks about why it is that Apple was so successful as a company and coming up with different types of strategies. Also talks about Martin Luther King and how it is that he stood out amongst all the very important people and orators and those who were trying to motivate others in the civil rights movement. And his philosophy on how it is that Martin Luther King was so successful in his messaging, I think it's applicable to everyone, irrespective of what it is that you do. But I think especially when you're trying to describe your role in solving for cancer and ending cancer as we know it for everyone, I really think it's insightful. And so something I would highly recommend.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to make a recommendation as well. Like many, I've become intrigued by the advent of large language models in AI and the possibilities they open today and the promises they make for tomorrow. Of course, there's also risks, as with any new technology. One of the most important guides to this world for me is the New York Times podcast, Hard Fork. It's hosted by two very knowledgeable tech journalists who keep it light and real, and they really know their stuff. You can find it wherever you listen, and we'll put links in the show notes for this podcast and the series of TED Talks that Dr. Knudsen recommended. That's all we have time for on today's episode of Inside Cancer Careers. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our guests. We want to hear from you. Your stories, your ideas, and your feedback are always welcome. And you're invited to take your turn to make a recommendation that we can share with our listeners. You can reach us at ncicc@nih.gov. Inside Cancer Careers is a collaboration between NCI's Office of Communications and Public Liaison and the Center for Cancer Training. It is produced by Angela Jones and Astrid Masfar. A special thanks to Lakshmi Grama and Sabrina Islam Rahman. Join us every first and third Thursday of the month when new episodes can be found wherever you listen. Subscribe so you won't miss an episode. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler from the National Cancer Institute, and I look forward to sharing your stories here on Inside Cancer Careers. If you have questions about cancer or comments about this podcast, email us at nci.info@nih.gov or call us at 800-422-6237. And please be sure to mention Inside Cancer Careers in your query. We are a production of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. Thanks for listening.